Welcome to the fourth and final debate of the American Solidarity Party's 2023 presidential primary. I'm Jeffrey D. Combs, the chair of the Tennessee branch of the American Solidarity Party and member of the American Solidarity Party's presidential primary committee. Tonight, we have all five candidates with us to discuss economic justice, justice reform, race, and more. Immediately following tonight's debate, ballots will be sent to all voting members of the party. If you do not have your ballot by Thursday morning, please check your spam, junk, promotions folders. You will also be receiving an email from the party with more information. We're going to go over the rules. The rules for tonight's debate. You will have 1 minute per candidate for your opening statement, 2 minutes per candidate for closing statements, and 2 minutes per candidate for debate questions. Time may not be reserved. If you yield any time, it has gone. The idea of extensions has changed. You now have time extensions to use to extend your own time or to respond to something another candidate has said. These include a 1 2-minute extension, a 1 1-minute extension, and 2 30-second extensions. You will be given an audible cue with approximately 10 seconds left and another cue when your time is complete. Now, the clock will be monitored closely. We will not shut you off mid-sentence right at 2 minutes, but you will be stopped shortly after. We will cut your mic if necessary. Please, candidates, be courteous to each other candidates. Feel free to attack policies, but not people. Please do not talk when someone else's time. If we have to cut off your mic during someone else's, for anything beyond a time infraction, you will lose the remaining time in your current statement. A second infraction may lead to you being removed from the debate. We also ask for all the candidates to please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. I will introduce our moderator, and we're very, very excited. Our moderator tonight is the author, commentator, the host, and executive producer of the Gloria Purvis Podcast, Gloria Purvis. With that, I now turn tonight's debate over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I hope I'll remember all those directions too on the candidate rules. I'm sure we're going to have a great time tonight. We have some very important issues to discuss. And as always, we'll be discussing the common good from a common ground with common sense. And since we have so many important issues to discuss, and I want to give the candidates their time and also the viewers their time, I'm just going to hand it over to everyone to basically start their opening statement. Remember, you have 1 minute. I will call you, and then you have your 1 minute to give your opening statement. Can we start with Peter Sonsky?
Well, thank you. Good evening. I want to also say thank you in advance to my fellow candidates and to those who are kind of behind the scenes working all of the buttons tonight. Thank you for your support of this live stream. So we've reached a very crucial juncture. The primary campaign is about to conclude, and party members are about to decide who will represent them as the presidential candidate, and for that matter, who will represent them as delegates to the American Solidarity Party convention. Our American political landscape is more contentious, I think, than it was in 2016 or 2020, and we're only at the beginning of the cycle. But the ASP has a chance to be different, to have a different approach and bring a different perspective to the upcoming election. One of civility, and one of, as we just heard, common sense. So I'm excited to be among those who are considered for the important task of representing the party and its values to America, and look forward to tonight's debate.
Thank you. Next, we have Joe Schreiner.
Jeffrey, this is for you. It happened in Arlington, Ohio, as I was campaigning throughout the area all day. I struck up a conversation with a man who had a recumbent bicycle. We connected as bicycle buddies, if you will, as I told him about our 3 long and global warming bicycle tours. I gave him some campaign literature, and he thanked me. And now I'm taking this up. I should get an extra 5 seconds for the hat thing. Anyway, a few days later, while campaigning in and out of Bud's Diner in Defiance, Ohio, I found myself animatedly talking nonviolence, baseball, and general politics with people I was passing out ASP literature to. A waitress approached me and asked, "The way you're talking to everyone, are you a congressman?" Lucy can verify that. All those years out there, I've learned to be extremely extroverted and to make it into the mainstream populace. And that's what the party needs right now, is somebody with common speak who can help us transition into the mainstream populace.
Thank you. Next opening statement, let's go to Dr. Larry Johnson.
Thank you. I'm really glad to have this opportunity tonight to make a statement. I am wearing this color in honor of the 1-year anniversary of the mass shooting at Uvalde schools, which I discovered today was the anniversary. And I think it's something that one should never forget. And I thought very deeply about this, and I felt that I needed to make a policy statement regarding this event. So I have decided that if nominated and elected, one of my very first legislative acts will to submit to Congress my Shea-Lee Gun Violence Prevention Act. And I will veto any legislation that comes to my desk before Congress deals with that legislation or its equivalent. And I will do it in honor of all those 10-year-olds who were murdered at Uvalde. Thank you.
And next, for our next opening statement, Erskine Levy.
Yes, how you doing? Thank you. Welcome to the fourth and final debate of the American Solidarity Party for the 2023 presidential primary. I'm glad you're all here. And I just kind of want to say, give a plug for everybody. I think at this point, whoever you nominate will do their best job. And I'm pretty sure whoever you nominate will be backed up by all the rest of us. And so I would like, though, to ask and seek for the nomination for myself. Thank you very much. And well, I just hope it's not a popularity contest. You got to think, what if something happens and we go against the 2 big duopolies of the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, and for some reason the country doesn't want them? Well, we're it. We're the ones. Maybe we'll be taken, we'll be chosen. So which one of us that are up here tonight could actually run the office of the presidency? That's what you need to think about. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. And for our next opening statement, we go to Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy. We cannot hear you. We can see you, but we cannot hear you. Are you muted? Did you mute? Can you unmute? Okay. Do you have earphones or anything or something? You can hear us, but we cannot hear you. Is your volume up? Okay, I can hear something. We heard your voice just now. Say it again.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, of course, this is how it would go. I apologize to everybody. I was trying to upgrade my hardware because I noticed there were some issues with blurriness and everything else. And of course that had to backfire. But anyway, I am Jacqueline Abernathy. I would like to go ahead and take my extension on this, please, my 1 minute extension. So I feel like by now, after so many debates and after my many years in the party, pretty much everybody knows me. And I have been the only one that's not enjoyed all of the props in previous debates. So it's feeling a little bit left out. And so I thought I'd bring in the big guns. And don't worry, it's not an actual gun, even though I'm a Texan. I have one of those. But that's not what I'm doing. And I realized that the prop that I can bring to the table actually is the best introduction for me. And so I have a thing for war trophies. As you all know, I've been a pro-life activist since college. And in college, I realized my affinity for war trophies during my first abortion debate, where I won so well, I took the opponent's name for a week. I had everyone call me Brittany for a week. I grew up, got a little less silly and petty, even though when I shut down the abortion clinic, I did take the no trespassing sign. I was a sidewalk counselor there. But of all my souvenirs from all my work, this is by far my favorite. And I've had some good ones. I had the executive order from Terry's Law in 2003 when we restored our feeding tube the second time. But this is my feeding tube bill war trophy. Typically, when you want a souvenir from passing a bill, the coveted thing is one of the bins that the governor uses to sign that bill. And I didn't want one of those. I wanted this. This is the gavel, one of the gavels that was used to rule down on the legislative session where my life's work was complete. I thought it would take 20, 30 years. It took 3 after my PhD, but I did my PhD solely to restore the legal right to food and water through a tube for people in Texas. My dissertation was on that. And I thought, hey, if I'm gonna have a prop, I don't look good in hats. I can't keep sunglasses. My kids keep running off. I figure, what better prop than this? So, and I feel like this is the best possible introduction to me in that if my house was on fire and all my kids and pets and everything were out, I might actually run back in for this. But I've been a pro-life activist. That's who I am more than anything. And so I felt like this was the best way to make my introduction at the final debate tonight. So I'm so glad glad everyone is here. And I look forward to a wonderful evening with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're going to jump right into our first question, and it's dealing with housing affordability. But before I get to the question, I want to give some framing and some background, not only for you, but also for everyone that's viewing. When we talk about affordable housing, we mean that the housing cost is no more than 30% of gross income, and that includes utilities. And this was set by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In June of 2022, the median asking rent in the United States rose above $2,000 for the first time. This means $2,000 per month would only be affordable for households earning at least $80,000 per year, which is well above the median U.S. household income of roughly $67,000. Not only that, the median sale price for homes in the U.S. in the first quarter of this year is about $436,000. And that's a huge increase since 2020. That's about a 32% increase. Nevertheless, this $436,000 median home price is still well above what an affordable house price would be for those making median income of around $67,000. An average and affordable home price would be around $200,000, $210,000 for people making $67,000 per year. So already we're seeing that house prices are even outside of what people's average income, median income could afford. Additionally, wage growth has not increased on pace with inflation. And with the rising cost of gas, food, medical care, and housing, consumers are depleting the savings that they built up during the pandemic and through stimulus programs. At the same time, consumers are now using credit cards to continue spending on these necessities. So you also have not only a decrease in savings, but an increase in credit card debt. And all of this impacts the ability of renters to save for a down payment on a home, as well as for people who already have mortgages to be able to make their mortgage payments, and current renters to be able to make their rental payments. And lastly, another factor in housing affordability is the actual shortage of available affordable housing. Now, some of the leading factors responsible for housing shortages are land availability and exclusionary zoning laws, which restrict the kind of homes that can be put in certain neighborhoods. And let me give you an example. An example of exclusionary zoning laws include minimum lot and square footage requirements for homes, and limits on the height of buildings, and restrictions on building multifamily homes. And what these laws have historically been used for is to exclude lower income residents from living in more affluent suburban neighborhoods. With all that in mind, what policies would you support to provide affordable housing for all Americans? And I'll give you a moment before I call on you just to think about that. Since we ended with Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, I'm going to begin with you, Dr. Abernathy. What policies would you support to provide affordable housing for all Americans?
You know, this is serendipitous because I actually had a conversation with one of my former grad students. I used to teach at the Tarleton State University Master's of Public Administration program, and she had written a proposal for tiny homes to deal with this crisis. It's a big problem here in Texas because we have a mass influx of exploding population, and of course, supply is down, demand is up, and prices are through the roof. And I told her today about a policy idea I wanted to do, which is the idea of accessory dwelling units, sometimes known as granny pods, and here in Texas, casitas, where you have a shed or a detached garage, and you convert that into an apartment, a standalone apartment. And I suggested that it would be good for cities to give a property tax break and even perhaps a subsidy for anyone willing to convert property they have into one of these. And they would be able to get that tax incentive as long as they were willing to commit to only charging rent to people who are of a certain income bracket. After that, they would be free to use it for perhaps an aging parent that might need it as just general supplemental income if they wanted. Of course, it definitely increases the value of their home, having that on their property. But my idea was essentially, we have this problem of the haves and the have-nots, where these homeowners do not want apartments. They think that that brings in the riffraff, and they forget that everybody pays property taxes. Oh, my property values are going to go down. Well, everybody pays property taxes. Some just pay it in the form of rent, right? Instead of the way you pay it as a homeowner. And this would also end that unfortunate problem with segregation, where just these would be popping up in residential neighborhoods, and it would give people the opportunity to send their kids to schools in those neighborhoods. So that's one idea I had.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, Joe Schreiner. What policies would you support to provide affordable housing for all Americans?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. And Jacqueline, that gavel really trivialized my my helmet. You know, right now the housing bubble is blowing up more and more and looks pretty close to the level it was at just before the 2008 recession. And if you couple that with inflationary trends right now, exactly what Gloria was talking about is what's happening with people on the margins of society. We went to Mankato, Minnesota, and there's an association for affordable housing up there. And what they've done is this association gets grants and gets donations actually from the people in Mankato, Minnesota, in order to create a pool to provide affordable housing as far as rent for renters, and even for the homeless. They have houses very similar to what Jacqueline was talking about, these tiny houses and that kind of thing. So here's a community that's rallying around that. Part of our platform too is that we believe with Social Security on a one-off thing, and this guy who's the director of that Mankato Association said a lot of people never end up in a home because they don't have the down payment in order to get in the home. Right. And so with Social Security, we think you can draw from it one time at like 5 or 6 years, it's your money, towards a down payment on a home for people that otherwise could not afford the down payment. So that's another thing. And we also went to Winona, Minnesota, or Winona, Wisconsin. That kind of blurs for me. We've traveled so much. But what they have is a home share program where they have a website in the town. They have a website in the town where they connect people with house share situations. So you're sharing heated air, cooled air, furniture, lawn equipment. And so there's a lot of different creative ways you can come at creating affordable housing for people. We just have to look outside the lines a little bit. That'll pass.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. Larry Johnson, what policies would you support to provide affordable housing for all Americans?
Thank you. As I answer that question, I will begin by just sharing Nevaeh Bravo, 10 years old, who was murdered at Uvalde. She will never be able to purchase a house. She will never be able to have a high income. She will never be able to marry. That will help her in attaining housing. Now, I actually like Joe's idea about using Social Security to help people be able to come up with a down payment for housing. But I think we need to focus on, in my Gateway Act, I talk about increasing wages. So I think we need to focus on that aspect. We need to raise people's income so that they actually can afford housing in different communities. Under the Gateway Act, one of the things I provide is an avenue for cooperatives to be expanded. Well, cooperatives can also be expanded in the housing area. So I think if we have more cooperatives providing housing, that would, coupled with increasing their wages, that would alleviate this problem, I think. For example, under the Gateway Act, I call for the minimum wage to be raised to $18.25 per hour by 2025 and $20 per hour by 2026, and then indexed to inflation yearly. So this is the beginning of the process: increase wages, have more cooperative housing, and then help people through a program like Social Security to be able to make down payments on purchasing their own homes.
Thank you. I believe we had a question about a redirect. Is that right now? No? Okay. Let's go with Erskine Levy. What policies would you support to provide affordable housing for all Americans?
Yes, ma'am. But I do want to say, and I saw it over in the text from people on the side, it's pronounced Levi, but I can't fault
What
you.
did I just say, Levi? I thought I said in the beginning, and I messed up the second time.
I can't fault you because the other Levi down the road will say Levy. So
okay.
I don't question anybody as long as you have L-E-V-I. I'm fine, but it is Levi. But my policies, well, first off, we have to ask, why are the prices so high? Is it the market? Is it available natural resources to build the houses? Maybe we need to look and see where we can lower that price a little bit. I know
I could tell you some of the factors if that's helpful. Some of the factors.
Get some extra time, but go ahead.
Yeah, some of the factors that cause the increase in the house, the shortage is, and the increase in prices is the demand is greater than the supply.
Yeah.
And then we have market factors that the cost of goods to build houses went up, which also then increased the price of houses as well. So just wanted to add that in there since you asked it. I did have that factoid, so hopefully that's helpful to you.
That is helpful. So, I mean, if we can find any kind of reduction in that, that would be great. But I know the market and the supply and demand that's the way it goes. But I do want to add, I like the tiny house thing. I like the grants. I like the Social Security. I like everybody's thing. But you know something? I'm a veteran. And if you want a VA home loan, you get zero down. Well, I'm not asking for zero down, but maybe there could be something along those lines. Families, especially struggling families, they can't afford, the 30%, 40%. We got to figure out to do something, maybe coupled with grants or Social Security to get them close to zero, maybe 10,000, maybe 5,000. That would be something we'd have to look at to see the feasibility of that kind of down. The veterans, hey, they're veterans. They served their country. Zero down is good. But let's see if we can extend that to other people, lower socioeconomic people, to be able to afford to get the house to begin with. That would be one of my policies, at least.
Thank you so much. Now we go to Peter Sonsky. What policies would you support to provide affordable housing for all Americans?
Well, thank you, Gloria. Your comment about the dearth or the shortage of affordable housing is right on the money. But what you didn't say, and what probably many realize, is that there is a surplus of housing in general. It's just housing that is not affordable, and it should work to moderate more expensive housing options and drive communities, builders, developers to go smaller. But for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to be the case. We have a cultural problem as well as a problem with the way that we run our communities. But the best way to attack this, obviously, is on a local level. We need to address zoning laws. You hinted at that at the very beginning. We need to find ways in which we can reduce those lot sizes, reduce the square footage sizes of houses. I heard mention about in-law apartments and additions and ways in which we can create opportunities for multi-generational housing. These are all situations that even in my community, I face all the time. And so the situation is indeed very real. The other thing that I heard was robust programs for first-time home buyers. We need to find ways in which we can provide incentives. We don't want to help people go deeper in debt and be unable to manage their affairs. But we want to provide ways in which we can encourage home ownership. That's what we're about. We're an ownership economy. We support families having their own home, and there can be programs on both the local and state level, especially, that can support individuals when they're purchasing their homes, and whether it's through reduced rates or whether it's through incentives like Erskine mentioned, I think we have plenty of opportunities to change that balance.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter. And Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy asked for a redirect.
Yes, ma'am. So I must respectfully disagree with you, gentlemen, about further overburdening Social Security. Just because I believe that we're already in a very dangerous place with that. And that tends to be a precedent that is set where so many programs are funded that way. The idea Ivanka Trump had of having maternity leave funded by allowing people to use their Social Security. I don't agree with that. I'm so glad Captain Levi mentioned VA loans. Well, that's only for those that served our military. But I bought my first house at 25, and I used an FHA loan where my down payment was rolled into my mortgage. And as long as it didn't exceed a certain amount of affordability, I was able to do that. So there are ways to go about this, the down payment issue. I'd also like to see rent included in credit scores, because that's the best indicator of someone being able to pay a mortgage. I'd like to see medical debt reclassified, because a lot of it is not affordability in getting a mortgage. They're paying just as much in rent as they would be paying for a house. It is that they don't have the credit score that they need in order to get a mortgage to begin with. So I feel like we need some help there as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to question 2. That's really going to deal with supporting family life. So one indicator of family well-being is time together. And work is one factor that significantly impacts time together. Work from home post-COVID-19 is the preferred work arrangement for parents. And many employers, including the federal government, are retracting work from home arrangements. Due to rising costs, an increasing number of households not only have 2 wage earners, but they often have one that has multiple jobs. Paid parental leave is another factor that impacts families, and research from the Journal of Health Economics suggests that underprivileged families may benefit most from parental leave policies, starting with better birth outcomes, including fewer early term births, possibly owing to decreased stress during pregnancy. Not only can parental leave policies bolster physical and mental health among lower income parents, they can also improve household security. After California passed its paid family leave law, the poverty risk among mothers of infants decreased by more than 10%. Paid leave is also associated with greater relationship stability and may even help reduce intimate partner violence. Childcare is also another stressor for families, and flexible work for both parents, with both parents sharing childcare, is the preferred model, according to a 2021 research brief from the Institute for Family Studies. This model allows for more time at home with children from both parents. Flexible work arrangements, wage parity with inflation, paid parental leave, and childcare are only some of the factors that impact family well-being. How do you propose making it easier to start or expand a family in the United States, given those factors? We'll start with Joe Schreiner to hear what policies you would support to help make family life more accessible and easier for us to start families in the United States.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to respond to Jacqueline, and I wasn't sure exactly how to do that, but that actually that ties into this particular question. I would just like an extra 30 seconds on the question. How does that work for everybody? Somebody
It's up to Bill. I think it's up to Bill, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Bill, nod your bow tie. Okay. All right. Yeah. My response to this goes back to the last question. And just to stay with the Social Security for a moment, what I was proposing is that people at a certain income threshold have access to Social Security because it is their money in order to draw. I understand Social Security is in trouble to a degree, but it shouldn't be. It should be a lockbox. We shouldn't be taking the Social Security money and putting it in other things, which is what we're doing right now. But anyway, to go back to, so if people in the lower incomes had access to that and they started to have home ownership and started to build up equity, that would help them financially. I mean, just kind of your common sense economics as far as that goes. As far as this in general, and again, it spins off of what people have been saying, is that one way to make things more affordable is for people to become more creative. As an example, Peter talked about retrofitting houses for like grandparents' places, or maybe a house share with an elderly couple who need a college student living with them and that kind of thing. So what happens is, as you configure the house, you need a carpenter in order to do that, or reconfigure the house. As people start to share space and they start to share all the stuff I talked about before, what does it do? It cuts your expenses in half. So all of a sudden you have, and it's important in the context of global warming, because we forget that producing items takes fossil fuel. So there's an author, his name's Pat Murphy, and he suggests that we go from being a society of consumers to being a society of conservers. And the more we move into that paradigm, the more money is freed up for a much better paradigm at home, which then in context of what this question's all about, was it would provide more time for family. It would provide more time for community. We've so long, we're kind of like rats on the treadmill in America without stopping and saying, hey, maybe we need to come at this in a totally different paradigm. That's my take on this.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Larry Johnson, how do you propose making it easier to start or expand a family in the United States?
Well, I think once again, I want to remind everybody, and I think it's very important that McKenna, 10 years old, will never have a family. Okay, she will never have a family. But I think under my Gateway Act, for example, the Alternative Vocational Development Program provides a way for people to develop a lifestyle while increasing their income so that they will be able to do things like get childcare and afford it within the context of the new career they're developing. So, for example, under the Alternative Vocational Development Program, people will be able to, instead of having to go all the way through college before they're ready to get a job, they can design their career around their family. Like if it's a young family, they design their career around their family because they're being supported through that program. So that's one example of how that from the beginning, when they first start their families, they begin to be able to get support. And of course, I would also support expanding the Family Medical and Leave Act. So it should not be very difficult to be able to get 6 weeks off with pay so that you can take care of a sick member of your family or have something to do with your children. So we should expand that act. So those are two ways that I believe we can make family lifestyle more accessible to more people.
Thank you. Next, we'll go with Erskine Levi. How do you propose making it easier to start or expand a family in the United States?
Well, that's a good question. I did bring up part of it in the last debate. I don't know how you can make this mandatory, maybe voluntary, but to have some sort of pre-marriage, pre-engaged encounter questioning session to find out what your partner wants. Get you both on the same sheet of music. Now, I can expand on that later, but I think helping lower socioeconomic families by doing several things. One of them could be to help train the main breadwinner. Now, you say sometimes people work in more than one job, but train the main breadwinner in other skills. Give them some tuition assistance to learn other skills, to employment training for different jobs, and maybe they can apply for higher paid jobs. Maybe some tuition assistance for the maid breadwinner and families, maybe the husband and the wife, to be able to go to trade schools, training, or even college. I wouldn't say maybe a 4-year college, but get 2-year colleges, that kind of stuff. And I like the idea of childcare. I work at a school. I'm a teacher. And when students graduate that are moms, the young teenage girls, when they graduate, they can leave their child at the school childcare for at least up to a year while they're out looking for a job. So maybe some sort of business level, maybe not at the same site, maybe something close by where childcare can happen when they have to go to work. That would be, I think, a good help. So parents don't have to worry about paying for it. Maybe there's a little cost, but it's with the business they're working at. Might not work everywhere, but heck, the more it works and the more places it can work at, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. Peter Sunsky, how do you propose making it easier to start or expand a family in the United States?
Thank you very much. I think the easiest way, the most efficient way to begin with is tax credits. We talked about, in particular, a child care tax credit, and that's an easy policy to put in place. We've been talking a lot throughout the campaign about making birth free or offering stipends or ways in which we can assist couples with the medical costs of having children. So that's another very valuable way and a way very deserving of further consideration. I heard extending the FMLA or Family Medical Leave Act provisions, which I think is a very good one. I think we need to also create some incentives for employers to be more relaxed with the hours situation that you mentioned, with providing parental assistance at work. The school district, of which I'm a Board of Education member, has a program for its employees to have childcare at an affordable rate. It's for members of the school district employees first, and then for members of the community for available spots after that. So I think that's a very successful local program that we've initiated. I had a listening session on this very topic with members earlier in the campaign and heard many different insights, many different concerns about this need. So I'm glad the question has come up because it's a valuable one and one that I think the ASP is poised to address.
Thank you. Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, How do you propose making it easier to start or expand a family in the United States?
I have actually a very specific proposal, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share it. I'd like to take my 2-minute extension on this one. I propose, it's been mentioned actually, Dr. Johnson, expanding FMLA. And the way I would expand FMLA is what I call an opt-in option, where it's a minimal pre-tax gross payroll deduction that people can opt into, and they can use the infrastructure in the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, to cash out and have actual paid leave. So as you recall, FMLA, all it does is tell people that qualify for it, and only 57% of American workers do, because there's lots of rules associated with, how many hours you had to have worked and what kind of employer you work for and how long you've been at the business. But it is for anyone that qualifies, that might have an illness of their own, might have caregiving that they need to do. So maternity leave, paternity leave, caring for an ill family member. I did a little back of the envelope math, and I respect the concerns about employers paying for leave. I don't know the economic consequences of that. I don't know if it's even feasible for businesses to handle that. But I can't think of many people that would be opposed to the idea of a 0.05, so less than 1%, 0.5% payroll tax that they can opt into. And by opting into it, they have the chance to get up to 12 weeks paid leave, and the payment they get, of course, is not going to be equal to what they may or may not be making. It has to be standardized in order for this to work. And we have the infrastructure, like I said, with FMLA to determine, it's a good place to start of who might qualify for leave. But we also have the infrastructure in our Social Security program, because you can pay into Social Security a lot more than somebody else, but it's capped. The highest benefit is somewhere around, I think, if you wait to retire, $4,500 a month. And this would be up to 12 weeks, with the minimum being about equal to what somebody would make if they are making minimum wage. So it's progressive, like progressive taxation. It's not a tax, but it's very progressive in that it actually benefits the poor that need it more than it benefits those of higher incomes that might have jobs that are more accommodating, that might have a leave or the ability to have short-term disability or other things that women like myself do to try to patch together some semblance of maternity leave. I like the Make Birth Free movement as well, but what I think is good about this FMLA expansion, the specific one, I would need to do more specific math to see what the exact number would be, but it would be so nominal that the person that opts in is unlikely to miss it. But since it is a percentage of your gross pay, a small one, but a percentage, that means, of course, people that make more are putting more in, and people who make less are putting less in. So it doesn't overburden the poor that way also, and it kind of helps subsidize the poor as well in that way. So FMLA needs to be reformed, obviously, and we need to make it where those people that do have higher incomes do not think that it's not valuable for them to opt into this program, because, well, wait a second, why am I paying 0.5% when I can just save that myself, when I'm only going to get back a certain amount? So there needs to be more logistical working out of my idea, but I believe it's a feasible idea. It applies to everybody, and it's one that I can see getting bipartisan support.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to question 3. On Valentine's Day this year, USA Today ran an article that stated the 2020 national marriage rate fell to 5.1 per 1,000 people, its lowest in 121 years. The decline of marriage, the rise of divorce and cohabitation, and the rise of the hookup culture have all helped leave the family in tatters. We've talked many times about the social and economic reasons that marriage has fallen out of favor. How does your administration reverse this trend? And we'll start with Dr. Larry Johnson on this question.
Yes. So this is a very difficult because this is basically a shift in culture that is happening, especially with Gen Z and also the millennial populations that have a very different view on this topic. So I have proposed what I call the Family Liberty Protection Act, which basically broadens the avenue by which people's marriages, their process of going through love and getting married is more free to more people. And at the same time, protecting the family in a traditional way in states, in religious institutions, and so forth. I think one of the ways that we can protect the traditional marriage or the natural family is protecting religious liberty. So by doing that, we make marriage stronger, and we also make it more specifically designed to deal with people who are in those traditions and feel like that protects their marriages. So I think that's a very important way to deal with the situation and find common ground with the shifting culture. They need to see examples of how marriage in a traditional way should work. Right now, they're not seeing many of those examples because everybody is making decisions that basically says marriage is not important. We can live together, and then later on, 10 years later or 15 years later, decide to get married, which usually doesn't work. So I think my Family Liberty Protection Act is one way to deal with protecting marriage.
Okay, thank you very much. Erskine Levi, what are your policies? What would your administration do to reverse this trend on marriage?
Okay, now I haven't done quite the amount of research I'd like to, but doing informal research, I have found that those states that teach abstinence before marriage, if they want to find out all the, what the married couples do after they're married, they can go ask their parents. But usually in those states, the parents are going to say, wait until you're married to find out. The states that have sex ed at very young ages, middle school, even younger, those states in general have higher teenage birth rates. And the culture that you talk to is a hookup culture, the get together culture. I teach at a high school, and I see that all the time. And maybe, I'm just going to say it. I'm saying it. We should stop teaching sex ed to public school kids at all and just teach abstinence if we're going to teach anything. That might help. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Peter Sonsky, what would your administration do to reverse this trend on marriage?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I read a statistic. You cited one that was stark. I read one that's similar, that in 1986, about 60% of 25-year-olds were married. And here in 2023, the number is only about 20% of those 25 years old. So we do have a dramatic change, and it's only in a very short period of time. I think we see a lot of family breakups, which do not provide a stable opportunity, a stable example for young people. We have a lot of economic challenges for young people that that need to be addressed. But I think there's structures that that are perceived in marriage that we need to look differently. It's a base for people to begin their lives. It's not a capstone or a place where their circumstances end. We need to show them that this is a way that they can have fulfillment in so many ways: raising families, working together, owning a home, having an experience of community that is replaced in so many ways by so many other obstacles and hurdles today. Larry had, Erskine had a short answer to this, so let me give you one that I would insist upon: ending no-fault divorce.
Ronald Reagan would be very upset. He introduced that.
One for the Gipper.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, what would your administration do to reverse this trend on marriage?
Well, you know what? Mr. Skonsky kind of hit a large portion of what I would do when it comes to ending no-fault divorce. I've mentioned this previously, but we don't necessarily need to encourage marriage for people that would get married. We need to stop penalizing marriage, as there's so many people out there that would marry if they weren't punished for it, if they wouldn't lose their Pell Grants or their health care for any children that they have. So there's that. But it's not just that we want to encourage marriage. Marriage is superior to cohabitation or other arrangements because of the stability that it provides. Children have the right to that stability. They have the right to their mother, the two people that made them, their mother and their father, working together to raise them and having a daily relationship with both parents. The problem is that stability went away the second that any party, just one, can dissolve this marriage on a whim. That's a problem. So we have to repeal no-fault divorce because we have to protect the innocent spouse, because there are lots of incentives to divorce your spouse, because oftentimes there's no punishment for it. You can keep the house, you can get child support even, and it's the other person, it's the jilted spouse, unfortunately, that ends up losing just everything that matters to them. I've seen this happen in person. I'd like to see a public defender for the innocent spouse. So if they are being abused or they're being cheated on by somebody that does not want to divorce them because they would have consequences for that, they are still able to, even as the lesser earner or even like a stay-at-home parent, they would still be able to get the help they need to assert their rights. So I'd like to see that happen as well, because I don't want to see people stuck in dangerous marriages. I want to see good marriages, strong marriages that last forever.
Okay, thank you. Joe Schreiner, what would your administration do to reverse this trend on marriage? We can't hear you. Joe, we cannot hear you.
We first let you know, Gloria, that Ronald Reagan is dead now.
Yeah, yes, I know, right?
And I would like the 2-minute extension on this. When I got the questions originally, I kind of prepared some answers to the wrong questions, but this is one that's going to fit. So I just want the 2-minute extension, Bill, on that, if I can. Okay, so bear with me with this. This will get around to marriage, but it's going to be a tremendously circuitous route. The ASP stance on this, the natural family founded on marriage of one man and one woman, is the fundamental unit of every human society. Family breakdown is a key contributor to widespread social problems, including divorce. I'm more than a bit confident it'd be a long shot that I wasn't the most authoritative ASP candidate to speak on this, given my counseling during the 1980s with dysfunctional family dynamics, which is a key issue in divorce. But first, and later throughout all of the campaign research, I've been able to clearly connect the dots between not only the divorce stuff, but family breakdown, as the ASP platform references, and the quote unquote widespread social problems in society. Example, I was also an addictionologist, and drug addiction, including fentanyl overdoses, are ramping up exponentially. During a southern border tour, I met with the sheriff's deputy in Las Cruces, New Mexico, who by day is in on the drug bust and by night is a DARE coordinator for youth. We conveniently forget, he said, we're the ones who create the demand for drugs on this side of the fence. Then there's crime. That's ramping up too. Some 80% of those in prison committed the crime under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or committed the crime to get money for alcohol or drugs. We met with Mark West in Fostoria, Ohio, who started an award-winning 2-year Oasis drug rehab program that's being used in prisons all over the country to help stem some of this. And school violence, shootings, the profiles of many of the shooters have been kids who have been bullied in schools. The kids doing the bullying, I found in my counseling work, usually are bullied at home by emotionally or physically abusive parents. These kids then act out their repressed anger on weaker kids at school. Might have been in Baldy, actually, as one example. We went to Glendive, Montana to research a healthy community model that's set up to reverse some of this family dysfunction. As we went to Wilmington College in Ohio to research school weekend retreats, where the College Peace Center puts on these weekends with clique groups in the high school in order to start to break down barriers and start getting a lot more camaraderie going in the school. You know, here's the deal. Our administration would follow the lead of Rosalind Carter, and when it comes to like ramping up mental health help, and also Betty Ford when it comes to addictions. And here's the bottom line with the whole thing, and tying it circuitously back to divorce. If I am somebody coming from these tremendously dysfunctional homes, and they're all over society right now, and a healthy marriage isn't modeled for me whatsoever, what are the chances I'm going to end up in a healthy marriage or, even want to get in marriage? Until we start to look at the systemic roots of what's driving this, we're just talking about putting Band-Aids on symptoms. And there needs to be a whole constellation of programs to heal the family in the country for the rest of that to reverse. It's just not going to reverse by rhetoric. That's for sure. So anyway, with that, I hear the little buzzer. I will pass.
Thank you, Joe. Our next question is about basically childhood hunger. According to NoKidHungry.com, over 9 million children face hunger each day in America. Many programs in place to combat hunger during the pandemic, especially among children, have recently expired. As a result, food insecurity is on the rise. And by food insecurity, we mean food intake and household members is reduced, and their normal eating patterns are disrupted because the household lacks money and other resources for food. Proper nutrition, particularly in the first 3 years of life, is important for establishing a good foundation, as it has implications for a child's future physical and mental health, academic achievement, and economic productivity. And roughly 1 in 4 Americans participates in at least one of the United States Department of Agriculture's 15 domestic food and nutrition assistance programs at some time during the year. The question I have for each of you is, how do you create healthier children with better long-term outcomes in life? Let's start with Erskine Levi.
Yes, thank you for the question. That was a very good question. According to my sources, proper nutrition for children is poor diets in early childhood can lead to deficiencies in essential vitamins and nutrients, such as vitamin A deficiency, which weakens children's immunity, increase their risk of blindness, and can lead to death from common childhood diseases like diarrhea even. We need to keep welfare programs, entitlement programs that help out kids, but we can't forget about the elderly also. But one of the programs I'm thinking of is the SNAP, or as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as food stamps. And I'm saying when they make it easier to get, people have to qualify. Lower socioeconomic, lower than the poverty level, which I believe at this point it's around 20,000. So if their combined income of the family is below that, well, then their kids should just automatically, qualify for this. So keep those requirements to be able to qualify, and keep the welfare programs. Don't try to drain it out. And as with Social Security, and as other candidates mentioned, people taking money from Social Security, maybe people are taking money from the welfare programs to pay for other things. Why? Put it back. Stop doing that. Put it back and fund it correctly, and then give it to the people that need it. And along with the SNAP program, ages anywhere from 16 to 59 years of age, one of the requirements is to have work requirements. Like, you need to prove you're working to get it. There's another requirement too, but it's the able-bodied adult without dependents program. But I'm talking about just general run-of-the-mill poor families. They should have a work requirement with welfare and food stamps. And just get it because you're poor. All right? Need to partake. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Sunsky. How do you create healthier children with better long-term outcomes in life?
Thank you. I think one of the easiest ways we can do that is through organized education. Here in the state of Connecticut, I'm aware as a Board of Education member that statewide, about 19% of students qualify for free or reduced lunches. But I know that the need is very great. And during the pandemic, there were federal funds that allowed for meals to be made available to all students in public schools for free. Now, in Connecticut, fortunately, the governor and legislature extended that program for another half a year in all of the public schools in Connecticut. And it went a long way to providing both the availability of meals, but also very nutritious meals, because food insecurity in so many ways is a measure of the quality of the food that students are receiving. So I think that is a most effective program to make sure that the students have access to meals and not only that, but quality meals. The other thing that schools can do is allow students to take home meals with them and provide summer backpack programs and other initiatives that help families to ensure that meals are being provided. I'm close to the Connecticut Food Bank, or now merged with another program and called Connecticut Food Share, and have for many years been a supporter of their initiatives. During the pandemic, as you described, the need increased exponentially, and food drives, the number of participants that were in those went from one amount to 3 times as many needs. So this is a legitimate problem.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, how do you create healthier children with better long-term outcomes in life?
Well, I started out as a social worker. I have a bachelor's in social work and a master in social worker. And I'm a program evaluator primarily. I actually just did a proposal for No Kid Hungry. And my concern was that we have just stopped the pandemic benefits that we were giving these kids, and just in time for them to lose free school breakfasts and lunch. The problem we have right now is that we have the wonderful USDA summer lunch programs. That's great. The problem is kids have to get there. They have to get there to eat in person. We have the money that we're not spending feeding these kids during the school year. I believe that should be turned into a stipend that's added to food stamp benefits in order to allow the families to just feed their kids at home, to have more money in order to feed their kids at home. Because getting these kids to the site, the church, that typically it's a school, but churches, some low income apartment complexes will housing units will have it. But the problem is these kids have to get to the food. I think we need to bring the food to the kids. And it has been proven that when the kids are hungry, closer to when the food stamp benefits come in, they score better in school. Because when kids are in fight or flight mode, they're not using their higher faculties. If they're thinking about hunger, if they're thinking about those things, they can't succeed. They cannot. And we've seen this, and we have school lunch debt problems as well, where kids are not even getting food in school. So what I would like to see happen is, first of all, just have school lunches be a universal program. I would love that. That's one. But also, let's extend benefits to the summertime that don't have this needless prohibition where kids cannot get to the food they need. Let's bring the food to the kids.
Thank you. Joe Schreiner?
Yeah.
How do you create healthier children with better long-term outcomes in life?
And I'd like the extra 30 seconds on this too, if that works. Okay, Peter was talking about the healthier food, and a couple other people have made allusions to that as well. And we went up to Appleton, Wisconsin, in that school. In the school system, it's all whole grain bread and pasta and that kind of thing, and fresh vegetables, and just what Jacqueline was just talking about. There's much better mental acuity with these kids, and they're more stable and they learn better and that kind of thing. The problem is that's not happening across the board in any way in America, and especially in the inner cities. And what I want to share here, again, it's a little circuitous, but it'll get to the point pretty soon here. Patrick Harris tweet posted by Marcos Lopez tonight in part reads, one of the roles of an alternative party is to create space for obvious truths. And keep that in mind with the following. Groups in recent years have been pushing the concept that eating is a moral act. And keep this in mind too. And here's a Catholic worker moment from our Cleveland experience. At a rec center gym in a poor, rough section of Cleveland in 2009, I just selected some young latchkey kids for a summer baseball team. I huddled them up, gave them an inspiring pep talk, and finished by exhorting them to go home and to practice before the next practice at the rec center. These kids broke off into groups, and one kid walked up to me, and I remember it like it was yesterday. He tugged at my shirt, and he said, "Coach, can we borrow a baseball?" You think that there's food in those kids' homes? Not much. What we have to look at, and it's difficult, but the American public has to start to look at this eating as a moral act thing, is that both in the inner cities, we waste billions and billions of dollars on non-nutritional junk food in America and beverages and that kind of thing. Meanwhile, there's these kids in the inner city and 24,000 people starve to death every day in the third world. It's like a partial nuclear explosion going off every day in the world. And so we have to start to look at this through a different lens. And what we need to look at specifically is how much we're being, quote unquote, food terrorists, supporting this stuff while people are in tremendous need. And so our administration would start to educate people about this kind of thing, as uncomfortable as that would be.
Thank you. Dr. Larry Johnson, how do you create healthier children with better long-term outcomes in life?
My approach to this is that if their families are not doing well, if they don't have livable wages, they can't provide for all the needs that their children might have, whether it's food or health or housing, and all of these go together. I totally support, for example, the government providing both breakfast and lunch to all students, K through 12. As a teacher who's spent almost 20 years in the classroom, I've seen how effective it is for children to have a proper nutrition. So I totally support that, and I would push for that. But I think something like the SNAP program, which is very important, only reveals the weakness of emphasizing that aspect. I want to emphasize raising family incomes. And through the Gateway Act and the SETI program and the HYPE program, I developed very detailed procedures by which we can raise families' incomes. Raising their incomes allows them to provide for their children. I've seen parents come in and, they have their EBD cards or welfare and so forth. And even with those cards, they can't get everything they need. And that's because we are not dealing with the aspect that actually will help them, which is raising their incomes and giving them jobs that provide their needs.
Okay, thank you. I just want to ask also, in this area of helping families, what you all think about temporary assistance to needy families, which the federal government gives grants to states and states can spend the money. And I was thinking about the most recent scandal in Mississippi where Brett Favre was given TANF funds that were supposed to go to needy families. He was given money to go toward his daughter's building a volleyball complex at her university. He was given $1 million to make speeches. How would your administration try to cut down on states abusing TANF funds in this way by redirecting it to whatever they wish, although it's not in alignment with the original goal of TANF funds, the TANF grants that the federal government gives to each state?
Is this a free for all, or are you going to point to somebody to answer?
I'm
Because I'm a
gonna
social worker and I'm raring to go on this one.
okay. Well, let's
Sorry.
start with you, Dr. Abernathy.
Okay, so I hope I didn't jump the line on that one.
No.
Okay,
it's fine.
so a little bit of history. TANF used to be AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, and it was changed in 1995 by Bill Clinton in a massive reform to welfare and this whole idea of welfare to work. And the idea behind it was that welfare should not be a lifestyle; it should be a step up, not something that people live on. So they decided temporary, TANF, that they were going to cap it to you can only be on it 5 years. And but unfortunately, what they did is they changed it to a block grant program, like you said, where the states were able to do what we refer to in social sciences as the race to the bottom, where they're doing everything they can to lower those benefits in hopes as if poor people can just straight up move to another state for more welfare. That's ridiculous. So they keep doing that. And they also, because it's supposed to be just, there's the rules around what they can spend this money on are so obscenely, generously ambiguous. They end up spending the money not as direct cash payments to families. They end up spending that money in various ways and being able to get away with it. I would like to see that this plan be reformed back the other direction, where it is more like Social Security, right? Where there is a stipend that someone gets and it's universal. If we want the state to be the one to administer it, sure, that makes sense for logistical reasons, because, you know, we need to lower that. It's a little hard to put that all on the government, but allowing states to have that kind of control over welfare programs also means they're always finding creative ways to try to kick people off and always finding ways to make it incredibly difficult. And, you know, welfare to work, meaning that they're, you know, drug testing people, looking for spending more money in drug testing people than they were spending actually on providing the welfare anyway, to catch maybe one person that's an addict that, you know, needs food and shelter anyway. So what I'd like to see happen is I'd like to see the reforms that Bill Clinton made go back the opposite way.
Thank you. Let's go. Erskine Levi, did you have thoughts on changes to TANF to temporary assistance to needy families so that the money is used as it should, as it was allotted?
Well, unfortunately, states do that a lot at the level. I'm guessing if the states do it, the federal government does it, and they seem to kind of throw in a state of emergency. Well, all the monies that were supposed to go to fixing the road, so well, we can't use it for that. We're using it for something else now. I think, as Dr. Abernathy put it, there's got to be some oversight. There's got to be audits. You can't give it to some daughter to build a stadium of some sort. It's got to be earmarked towards what it was earmarked for. And if it doesn't get used that year, well, it'll be used next year. Have it there for them until it is used up, and maybe another program will come along and help them with that area. But I think that was a travesty to, you know, have the money go to something else when it didn't need to. It wasn't needy. I mean, it would be nice to build the thing that his daughter built, but there got to be some other way to do it. So, and have some way to take the money back, have some way to possibly, you know, penalize them some other way. You use the money you're not supposed to, well, then you obviously didn't need it for this. Okay, we want 20,000, $1 million, or whatever back from some other program you're not using, and we'll take it back now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joe Schreiner, what are your thoughts on TANF grants to the states? If you have any ideas on how the federal government can ensure that that money is used for its appropriate, what it was intended for?
Oh, I like Brett Favre until that happened too, Gloria. Painful.
Yeah.
It was painful. You know, I'm not sure if he was cognizant of what he was doing or not. But anyway, there is a guy on this, on the chat on the side, Pilgrim Piper, actually. And this is what I think. I think Erskine talked about it, Jacqueline talked about it. Yeah, there needs to be more oversight in those kind of programs. I mean, you know, common sense. But what we forget is ASP, it's like totally the antithetical to subsidiarity, from the standpoint that what we have are these big federal Leviathan programs that are providing for these needs, which is fine in the short-term stopgap measure. But what we need, when I was in the inner city with the Catholic workers, They had gone down there and rolled up their sleeves. And these were people of some means who had moved into one block of West 38th Street. They started an urban farm. This pilgrim guy over here was talking about teaching kids how to garden. They coached these rec center kids. They tutored the kids. They gave microloans to people in the community. They came up with a model that was so tremendously good as far as helping not only the kids, but the adults in the neighborhood. And that's the answer. The answer is to start to create mixed income neighborhoods like they did down in New Orleans after Katrina, and to get people to start to move back into the city, live in, and here's the big word, solidarity with those people that are struggling, and to help them in a very systemic, encompassing way, as opposed to just focusing on these government handouts that are not the ultimate answer. The ultimate answer, again, is living in solidarity with these people and helping in a very multidimensional, spiritual way.
Okay. Peter Sunsky, how might you address the abuses of TANF grant that the federal government gives to states?
Sure, thank you. And I think it's, TANF is only one example. And Joe, I can always count on you to be an advocate for subsidiarity. And this is what I'm all about too. The money goes up, but it never comes down, or it never comes down completely as it went up. And we've got these layers of bureaucracy, as you cite. And quite often we get mandates for things that here at the local level, we need to pay attention to and to use funds that are directed to us from higher levels of government to take care of. We know what we need in local community areas. We know what can fix problems, but we don't have the flexibility, we don't have the authority, we don't have the resources, because all of that money has been managed wisely by higher levels of government. Keep the money where it belongs, with the people who have the needs. Let local governments manage the affairs instead of having higher levels of government continually trying to tell us what is in our best interests.
Thank you. Dr. Larry Johnson, your thoughts on federal government grants of TANF to the states? How would your administration make sure it's used for the purpose allotted?
For me, this is a corruption question, and I will make sure that my administration very vigorously police these programs. I think we can give block grants to states, but we should give those block grants without losing the power to police them. So for me, a person like Brett Favre, I would have the Attorney General basically make sure that he's an example, take him to trial, get him convicted for doing what he did. And this is a corruption issue, and I would go very strongly against people corrupting the system in that way.
Okay, thank you. Next question. On May 1st of this year, a homeless man boarded a New York City subway train, shouting that he was tired, hungry, and ready to die. This 30-year-old man had a history of mental illness. His name was on a roster maintained by the city of the homeless people living on the street, whom officials consider most urgently in need of assistance and treatment. 3 passengers subdued the man. One of the passengers held the man in a chokehold, which killed him. While the particulars are being sorted out by the legal system, this case does tragically highlight the plight of the homeless, many of whom are mentally ill in our society. The ASP principles state that we affirm a special collective responsibility to the most vulnerable members of society and call for societal structures that uphold the equal value and dignity of each person, regardless of any personal characteristics. How would your administration create and promote societal structures that would uphold the dignity of the homeless and the mentally ill in our country? I'm going to start with Unless somebody wants to volunteer to go first. I realize maybe somebody just wants to. Okay, I'm going to start with Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy.
Well, I was actually kind of holding myself back because I was afraid I was being rude before.
No,
I didn't know if that was an impromptu question.
No,
Just follow up if anyone wanted to weigh in, and anything having to do with social issues and social justice. Because I have worked exclusively in social services in the public sector. Of course, I have a lot of thoughts on this. But I am going to not answer your question, but answer it in a different way. Say his name, Jordan Neely. It's Jordan Neely. It's not just an issue of how we treat our homeless, and it's not just an issue of how we treat our mentally ill. That was an explicit example of Black Lives Not Mattering. And the fact that somebody can just be making other people uncomfortable. There was no evidence whatsoever that there was really any sort of threat there. But this happens all the time where unarmed, maybe perhaps mentally ill people of color end up on the receiving end of violence, whereas people that look like me never do, or very, very rarely do. This is a problem. So yes, we do need to deal with homelessness. And the way I would do that was exactly, I've written a blog post on this, is the problem is they're homeless, give them homes. That's actually less expensive than all of the consequences that come with prison and hospitalization and things of that. It's cost effective, and it works to preserve their dignity, and it helps them get up on their feet as well. As far as mental illness, we need to treat mental health care the same way we treat physical health care, which I know is ironic because in America, we don't do that great a job on physical health care either. But still, we need to have more benefits for mental health care, and it needs to be covered in insurance and public programs as well.
Okay, thank you. Joe Schreiner, how would your administration create and promote societal structures that would uphold the dignity of the homeless and mentally ill in our country?
Yeah, my take on that, to go back to Cleveland and the Catholic workers and that kind of thing, is the reason why most people are homeless is because of mental health issues. And until those are dealt with, then that situation is not going to change unless, society comes up with a much better safety net to help these people. And that's in part what Jacqueline talked about finding them homes. In Los Angeles, they build clusters of tiny homes in order to take people in. But, you need like a care team of people, just like these Catholic workers did with the homeless down there. They set up a drop-in center for the homeless in the evening. They had houses of hospitality where they took homeless people in and lived with them in community. They extended them. We had a Christ room in our small apartment where we would take homeless people in there. And I'm going to tell you a quick story, and it's about a guy who befriended a couple of our kids, and he lived in a little box under a bridge abutment out by the railroad track. He had PTSD. He was a Vietnam vet, couldn't be around anybody. But through the exposure to these Catholic workers over an extended period of time, where there was an infusion of love, basically, he started to get on his feet slowly. Eventually, he got into a little boarding house with a room. He got a job. And one night, the boarding house burned down, and he saved 5 people before he died of asphyxiation out in the front yard. And he was saying, Jesus loves me. And you'd have to know the whole story, but that was just an absolute miracle. Bottom line with that, he had called me 3 days earlier and said how appreciative he was about what he had felt from the Catholic workers. And so it's not just about government programs. It's also about, again, us rolling our sleeves up, especially people that are spiritual, and living in solidarity with these people in order to try and help.
Thank you. Peter Sunsky, how would your administration create and promote societal structures that would uphold the dignity of the homeless and mentally ill in our country?
Thank you. You know, the case you cite is a tragic one, and it really is an institutional failure. this is in so many ways, and I think this is what Joe was working toward. It's a cultural issue, not only an issue of government programs. I have found so often that here locally we provide services like this, but we provide them in a much different way than they are provided at levels that are impersonal or even insensitive to the true needs. And nonprofit, community-based, and volunteer organizations, religious organizations, often can do a much more effective way of helping these situations on a local level than we can do so much larger levels of government. Housing seems to be an easy answer, but it's not, because for the individuals who are in need, the individuals who have the mental health needs, the ability to live as others do in a normal housing situation is a tremendous adjustment. So all of this requires a great deal of programming, a great deal of societal assistance in order to make them happen. We can do them, but we need to help effective areas, effective levels be the ones that are providing these services.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Larry Johnson, how would your administration create and promote societal structures that would uphold the dignity of the homeless and mentally ill in our country?
Well, first of all, this is like three parts to this question, and I'm just going to start first by saying that, as a policy, I understand that the Neely situation may still be an ongoing case. What happened there? So I'm not going to comment on that specific particular case, and I don't think presidential candidates should. On the issue of mental illness and the homeless, this is something that we kind of botched as a society. We began releasing these people without giving them any kind of systemic support. And so we need to go back to recognizing that they need a whole life support. They need total support in terms of, not only in terms of how do we get them in a working environment where they can participate, how can we get them the mental therapy that they need, how we can get them the medicines that they need. All of that has to be a part of helping the homeless and the mentally, those who are suffering mentally. You don't just release them into the population and expect them to just deal with it. So that's a real problem. And then there's a third part of the problem, for example, that's dealing with the criminal justice side. We totally destroyed the self-defense common law doctrine in this country in order to make it easier for people to respond in a violent way. We need to stop that. We need to turn it around and restore the common law concept of self-defense. Too many people are trigger happy. Too many people are willing to kill quickly without any real reason for doing it. And finally, I will say this is one of the reasons that I'm very, very disappointed in the Biden administration for failing to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, because we need to deal also with how police deal in these situations. We need to hold them accountable. So all three of these things have to be in one package.
I'm going to just, because you have not used any of your extensions, I don't know if you want to use it here. I wanted you to explain your common law concept, what you mean when you talk about the common law concept of self-defense, but that would be up to you to use. You don't have to, but you'd have to use your extension to be able to further discuss that. Wait, do you want to use one of your extensions?
I will use my extension.
Okay.
The common law concept of self-defense requires that you make an effort not to engage someone, for example, who is not pressing their attack. So you have an obligation, for example, to take one step back. You have an obligation not to escalate the situation. So if you go home and get your weapon and come back, that's not self-defense, okay? So this is what I mean by one example of upturning self-defense. Somebody coming and knocking on your door is not a threat. They're not threatening you. So you have no self-defense you have no right to self-defense there. There's no common law self-defense in that situation. So this is what we've done in our society, and it's basically racist, and it's an attempt to not have to deal with the fact that many of the people who suffer under the upturning of the common law self-defense rules are minorities.
Okay, thank you. Erskine, Levi.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. You already know the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, there you go. I used to be a police officer way back in my time. And I think in many instances, just for us showing up in our uniform, that escalated it right there. And I'm not going to go in non-uniform. So the escalation part isn't always on the side of the victim. I mean, it would be great. You said, don't escalate it. Step back. Okay, that's great. But it's not going to happen all the time. You got to have some fortitude to be able to do that. But the homeless problem, people are homeless for various different reasons. There's, of course, the drug reason. They get into drugs at early part of life, and then they can't hold a job. They can't find a place to live. I understand all that. The veterans, and some of them are also on drugs. Veterans, they served our country. They should not be homeless. Tiny homes maybe or something. I've seen the VA in Los Angeles area. I can't remember exactly where, and they have little tiny homes. That's great. The people that are on drugs, they just didn't start just then and become homeless yesterday. So they're probably, most of them, I'd say 90% of them have some sort of police record. They should know. And as Dr. Johnson said, if we know this, we don't let them back out. You're on drugs. My school does this. If you do something wrong, especially with drugs or any kind of violence, we get you some help. We get you some psychological counseling. And sometimes we even use that. This won't go on your record if you do some psychological counseling. And usually a lot of kids at my school, especially in continuation high school, pick that. Okay, it won't go on my record. Okay, I'll take the counseling. And then, of course, they get counseling. So as Dr. Johnson said, we don't just let them back out and be a problem and a burden on society. We need to help them out, even if it's against their will. But I do also understand, I don't mean hold them down, don't duct tape them on, you know what I mean. Can I have that a little bit of extension? I've never taken one yet, at least a minute.
Yes.
Thank you. See, what was I going to say? I'm lost my train of thought.
You were saying you don't mean holding them down. That's
right. Yeah. No, I don't mean that, but I mean, they're going to say no. And are you sure you want to say no? We can help you out here, and really try to cajole them into getting help. Free country, you can pick what you want, but at least if they pick what they want, even after you show them, then maybe they might not. But add to all that, we have homeless shelters all over Los Angeles. I live in the area of LA County, and for many times every night they go unslept because they have to live by the rules. They can't use drugs. They can't have sexual relations, and by golly, they don't like that. And at least there's trying in some cases, but we need to help them out, especially in their early ages, being with the police, being drug users. Maybe possibly we can cut them off at the beginning, and they won't be a problem and a burden to society later. So I think that's what we should focus on, to helping them out as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. This next question is going to deal with incarceration and poverty. Jails are usually run by a city, local district, or county, and they house people who are newly arrested or waiting trial or sentencing. People sentenced to less than a year may serve all of their time in a jail. Prisons, however, are long-term facilities for people convicted of serious crimes. They tend to be under state or federal jurisdiction. Each year, according to the Prison Policy Initiative, over 600,000 people go to prison. People go to jail 10.6 million times a year, including those who cycle in and out due to mental illness, substance abuse, and poverty. Given this information, and a California study from the Cato Institute determined that incarceration permanently affects wages. Someone who has been incarcerated can expect to earn roughly 40% less than someone who has avoided detention, and the effects are long-lasting. How do you propose we reform a justice system that reinforces poverty, especially among people of color who tend to have higher incarceration rates and are incarcerated for longer periods of time? Let's start with Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy.
Well, that's a great question. If I could possibly take my last 30-second extension, what I was wanting to say to redirect on the last question kind of parallels very well with this question. And what I wanted to say was I'm sorry?
No, I was hearing a lot of noise in the background. I was going to ask somebody to mute, but it's gone. Go ahead.
You know, I just immediately assumed it was me and I couldn't figure out how.
No, I don't think so.
Captain Levi, I agree with you that just the presence of police, just that presence escalates the issue. Absolutely. Especially since there's a lot of rampant but totally rational distrust when people of color are Black folks are 13% of the population, but 27% of those that are fatally killed by police. If you are mentally ill, you are 16 times more likely to be killed by a police officer. And up to half of the fatalities with police officers are mentally ill people. So the defund the police has been rapidly misunderstood. It's not about, not respecting police and what police do well, what we need police for. It's about not having police as the people responding to this, but trained mental health professionals. So I wanted to say that first. Now, when it comes to prison reform, I would really like to see more restorative rather than punitive justice. And the problem we have is, well, first of all, we need to abolish private prisons. That's one. They keep prisoners longer. Studies show that they keep prisoners longer because they make money for every bed that they keep someone in. And also, that doesn't lower recidivism. Recidivism is actually higher for those that come out of private prisons. I would like to see those abolished. But more than anything, I'm a big fan of the ban the box idea, which is that box that says, have you ever been convicted of a felony that you have to check, that instantly gets people disqualified from jobs. I understand that there are certain violent felonies and things like that we need to take into consideration when we're staffing certain jobs. I get that. But people end up turning back to a life of crime just because they can't get legitimate work. And, with our credit reports, something goes on 7 years, it will fall off. We still owe that. Perhaps we were irresponsible. It's totally our fault. It would be nice to see non-violent felonies, if they haven't re-offended. I would like to see ban the box, yes, but how about not having that haunt them for the rest of their lives? Because when you can't redeem yourself, you do end up turning back to crime. And it has nothing to do with necessarily wanting that life. It could just have everything to do with not having any other viable alternatives. So that's a way that I would like to deal with the issue of prison reform and criminal justice reform.
Okay, thank you. Joe Schreiner, how do you propose we reform a justice system that reinforces poverty, especially among people of color who tend to have higher incarceration rates and are incarcerated for longer periods of time? We can't hear you.
That's twofold, Gloria. One, you talked about the revolving door at the beginning. And again, with my counseling background, what needs to happen when those people, if we had the money and the resources, is there needs to be a comprehensive psychosocial assessment done of the person from every different angle. And then after that assessment, they need to be given the kind of help they need, whether it's counseling or it's job training or it's more education or whatever that is. But we're a little short on doing all that. However, in the long term, we went down to Pikeville College in Kentucky to meet with a criminal justice professor. The guy's name's Kay Hardesty. And he said, because society as a whole doesn't financially prioritize this, restorative justice programs and the like, prisoners often end up in dead-end warehousing situations. Besides that revolving door, they just sit for years and years without any kind of help. And I keep telling stories about people, and this happens to be a person of color, was Black. His name was Emmett. California, we interviewed Ray Geisel, who had a 12-step Christian prison ministry. He started working with Emmett, who was a Black man in his early 40s. Emmett had grown up in a gang war zone in the inner city of Miami. His only way out was joining the service. He was sent to Vietnam and saw a lot of fighting and developed a drug habit to cope. Back in the U.S., he still had a drug habit, a severe case of PTSD, and when he caught his wife cheating, he killed the man and got life in prison. However, in prison, on a restorative justice track, Emmett got straight, got counseling for his PTSD, went to school online, and got a forestry degree. And whoever's just shuffling papers, if you're going to stop that, that'd be good. At 17 years, Emmett was released, got a job in forestry, got married, and now he goes back into prison with his own ministry to help others as he has been helped. So restorative justice does work if you have the time, the resources, and people are willing to do that. Time and resources is the big wild card in this whole thing.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Larry Johnson, how do you propose we reform a justice system that reinforces poverty, especially among people of color who tend to have higher incarceration rates and are incarcerated for longer periods of time?
Well, I actually agree with Dr. Abernathy, and she covered really important issues about no more private prisons. It's just for-profit, dealing people for profit is ridiculous. We need to also make sure that we totally end incarcerating people for drug offenses, simple drug offenses, that should be totally abolished. It's like the war on drugs is a total failure. I would also add to this that we need to stop preventing or prohibiting people who have served their time, whether a felony or misdemeanor, from being allowed to vote. These people have served their time. They should be allowed to come out and vote and participate in society, because who you vote for helps develop the types of programs that help you improve your life. So when these people are prevented from voting, they're prevented from being able to elect people who care about their plight and will develop the type of programs that will assist them in improving their situation after they get out. So this whole notion of like saying you can't vote because you had a felony is wrong. And so all of that has to be stopped.
Okay, thank you. Erskine Levi, how do you propose we reform a justice system that reinforces poverty, especially among people of color who tend to have higher incarceration rates and are incarcerated for longer periods of time?
Yes, thank you for the question. I just kind of want to add that we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We have other acts enacted in California that they can even go back if they can show there was discrimination in their sentencing and get that reversed. I mean, that's all great and wonderful. But I want to look at it this way. Anybody who has a felony, now you would say that people of minorities might be staying longer in prison for that, but anybody who has a felony should get some physical, mental help. And I'll tell you why. There's a doctor by the name of Dr. Daniel Amen in Orange County, and I'm sure he has satellite posts all over the country. They do what they call brain SPECT scans. And what they do is they show the inactive areas of your brain. It doesn't you don't have holes in your brain. It's just when they do the brain SPECT three-dimensional scan of your brain, it comes back and shows where the holes are. Again, not holes, just inactivity portions of the brain. They have treatments for that. And I'm guessing, I've seen some of these brain SPECT scans, people on drugs, it looks like they have holes all over them. And you know, big swaths of the brain are gone, or at least not active. And I'm pretty sure it's an expensive procedure, but if we're going to, you know, put people in prison for over a year as a felony, I think maybe we should put them through give them a free brain SPECT scan to see what's wrong, and then maybe give them some treatment. And maybe when they serve their sentence, they can get out and be a productive member of society because they're using their whole brain and not just the parts that haven't disappeared.
Okay, thank you. Peter Sunsky, how do you propose we reform a justice system that reinforces poverty, especially among people of color who tend to have higher incarceration rates and are incarcerated for longer periods of time?
Thank you. Well, I've heard several of my fellow candidates mention getting rid of the for-profit institutions. That's something that we have on our platform, and that seems like a very fundamental suggestion. Reevaluating the sentencing guidelines in so many jurisdictions, especially minimum sentencing requirements. The restorative vision of justice is so important. We need to help people to rehabilitate, and I think training programs are essential. If it's a training program that might happen during incarceration, or if it's a training program that could be an incentive for individuals for early release to take training, especially in the trades, I think would be an exceptional focus, because there's need for the trades in a particular way. State and local governments can provide programs for individuals that they can take advantage of very simply. We've got a lot of initiatives like that already, but we need to be able to tailor them so that they can be made available for this population. There's plenty of projects too. There's plenty of opportunities for employment that we can offer in a way of constructive rehabilitation. In some ways, I recognize that that's unpopular with labor, and it has to be a program that will be understood as being an initiative that can somehow benefit all involved. But to be sure, providing incentives to employers, providing incentives for organized labor to welcome individuals like this into their programs is a policy that we can take advantage of.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Larry, you asked for a redirect?
Yes, thank you very much. Basically, I wanted to piggyback over what Mr. Sonsky said here, and that is, in my Gateway Act, I have what I call the Alternative Vocational Development Program. And I think this program would be perfect for people coming out of incarceration, because it doesn't require them going to college, and it allows them to develop their own career development program, and they will be given the same kind of grants that someone going to college would receive.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I believe I got everyone here. I'm just looking through and make sure I got everyone's. Yes, I did. Okay, the next question is about white nationalism and the military. Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama, the Republican senator from Alabama, in an interview on NPR complained that military recruitment was down because the Democrats are attacking our military, saying we need to get out the white extremists, the white nationalists, people that don't believe in our agenda as Joe Biden's agenda. The NPR reporter followed up with a question about whether Tuberville believes white nationalists should be allowed to serve in the military. Tuberville's response is, they called them that, referring to the Biden administration. I called them Americans. Pressed further on whether he believes white nationalists should be serving in the military, Tuberville said, well, what is a white nationalist? The reporter says, a white nationalist is someone who propagates Nazism, someone who doesn't believe Black and brown people are equal to white people. And Tuberville asked her, you think a white nationalist is a Nazi? The reporter said, well, yes, that's one of their beliefs. And Tuberville says, well, I don't look at it like that. I look at a white nationalist as a Trump Republican. That's what we're called all the time, a MAGA person. I agree that we should not be characterizing Trump supporters as white nationalists. His office later commented and tried to clarify that Senator Tuberville was being skeptical of the notion that there are white nationalists in the military, not that he believes they should be in the military. Look, a Pentagon report warned that even a small number of extremists poses a threat to national security and to the cohesion of the armed forces, citing murders, foiled terrorist plots, and other incidents linked to white supremacists in the ranks over the past decade. Now, despite a low number of cases in absolute terms, individuals with extremist affiliations and military experience are a concern to U.S. national security because of their proven ability to execute high-impact events. It doesn't take a lot of them, but just a few well-trained killers can wreak havoc in our country. And access to these service members with combat training and technical weapons expertise, that can increase the probability of success and potency of planned violent attacks. And the Secretary of Defense found this to be such a serious thing, he ordered each branch of the military to stand down to discuss the threat posed by white supremacy and similar extremism. So the question to you, How do you view the threat from white nationalism in the military? And what do you think needs to be done to combat it? Let's start with Joe Schreiner on this question. How do you view the threat from white nationalism in the military? And what do you think needs to be done to combat it?
I was hoping I wasn't going to be the first one to get this question.
Oh, maybe. Okay. Well, does somebody else want to jump in?
No, no,
Okay.
no. I don't want to dodge. No, I don't
Okay,
want to
Joe.
dodge it. It's my turn. This is kind of a loaded question. And the way that I look at it is we moved into an enclave of mostly blacks in the near west side of Cleveland by the inner city. And so tremendous respect for blacks, whites, Hispanics, etc. I don't in any way agree with the ideology of white nationalism. However, I have also watched, just that you mentioned NPR. I listen to NPR periodically, and I like some of their stuff, but they are as slanted as the day is long when it comes to media. I'm a journalist. And right now, the divide between Fox News and NPR and CNN, it's hard. It is so partisan. It is off the chart. And so in this particular case, yeah, if there is white nationalists that are in the military that are posing problems, and boy, there's all kinds of fine lines around that. I mean, how many liberals are in the military that are causing different kinds of problems? For instance, promoting transgenderism where they're cutting up kids, or promoting abortion where they're killing babies in the womb. And I mean, again, and I'm not dodging this. I'm just saying that there's so many different sides to this. You have the Biden administration that is demonizing all the Trump supporters with this MAGA deal. And then Thomas Merton once said, when you're demonizing the other, you're avoiding looking at yourself. And so I can't, to put this in a box would be tremendously difficult. I don't think fair in the context of trying to answer this outside of an individual basis with each person. I'll pass with that.
Okay. Dr. Larry Johnson, how do you view the threat from white nationalism in the military? And what do you think needs to be done to combat it?
Well, it is obvious that white nationalism doesn't belong in our military, and it is a threat to military cohesion. We cannot have that kind of thing going on, and I would hope that our generals and the Joint Chiefs of Staff will do whatever is necessary to root it out. Those people should be dishonorably discharged. Now, how we combat it, let's not elect Trump. Let's not re-elect someone who has been impeached twice. Never in American history has this happened. And the problem is he actually ignites these kind of people with their belief systems. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to have a sympathetic ear to a form of Nazism. I don't care what shape it takes. And so this is something we have to combat. If we're going to have common ground in this society, there can be no room for white nationalism, black nationalism, Hispanic nationalism, any kind of nationalism that excludes any other ethnic or racial or religious group in this country. I will totally oppose that.
Erskine Levi, how do you view the threat from white nationalism in the military, and what do you think needs to be done to combat it?
Okay, well, as that reporter said, if you count nationalism to be Nazi, that's horrible. But there's that kind of belief everywhere. There's the KKK, there's other neo-Nazi groups. If they can prove you belong to those groups, yeah, you should not join the military. But let me tell you something, there's racism everywhere. I used to be in the military. I was a captain in the United States Army, started out in 1981 and got out in 2002. And I'm sorry, at least while I was stationed in various different places of the world, I personally have never incurred anybody who was racist. And in fact, it's the least racist place in my time when I was in that I could possibly be in. Sergeants, black sergeants were above me. I had no problem with them. I was in charge of other minorities when I gained rank. It just doesn't happen. And, talk about Trump or Biden or anything like that. We should not be teaching CRT woke stuff to our military to prove that just because you're white, you are wrong and you are racist. That is wrong. Can I use, I think there's a 2-minute extension on this that I have not used yet.
Yes.
Okay. Again, also being a police officer, I've never personally worked on anybody that I knew was racist, but I'm sure there was racist people there. So now how do you tell someone's a racist or what you would call a white nationalist? Unless they're on some sort of rolls in the KKK or any kind of neo-Nazi group, and you can find that, you wouldn't know. And talk about training people that, get them all this training and then they get out and become even worse society. Well, then there's gang members, we're training them. If they join the military, you could look at it that way. Almost anybody in any color can belong to different gangs, white gangs, Asian gangs, black gangs, Hispanic gangs, American Indian gangs. I'm just saying, if people are going to join our military to defend this country, if you can find something wrong that they shouldn't, well, they should be able to. And again, with my experience and my 20 years in the military, raising to the rank of captain, I never heard of anybody that was racist. Again, there may have been, but it didn't come out when I was there. So unless I can think of something else to say and ask for redirect, I guess I'm done.
Okay, let me just give some background for everyone. The reason the question was asked is because there was a report that showed that there were members in the military that were part of groups like Adam Waffen and other nationalist groups who said they found that they had no problem getting into the military, even wearing some of their gear that showed like Nazi symbols or even the tattoos and whatnot. And because of their training, that's why the report from the Pentagon was listing this as a threat, even though their numbers may be small. It's because of the type of training. And also these groups go and try to recruit people with military training that the Pentagon decided, the Secretary of Defense decided that each branch of the military had to have a day where they stand down and address how they will deal with this extremism in the military because of the actual threat to our country. If these people are not caught and stopped, the actual threat, a small group of trained killers basically could wreak havoc in our country. So I just want to give a little bit more context and background for people to understand where this is coming from and why it was a question brought at this presidential forum. Peter Sonsky, how do you view the threat from white nationalism in the military, and what do you think needs to be done to combat it?
Well, thank you. White nationalism is real, and it's a problem. It's a problem not just in the military, obviously, but that's your focus. I am not familiar with the report that you cite. I took a few notes while I was listening to you. There are many other forms of extremism too, and they're finding their way in. I can only imagine that there are two reasons that this is the case. Number one is that there are unethical individuals involved in the recruitment process that are overlooking real signs that there are problems, and there's an incomplete or insufficient screening process. We saw that clearly in the case of the young man from Massachusetts who shared military secrets on the internet. Plainly, there were red flags that indicated that this was a potential problem, yet they were overlooked. He was disciplined and not discharged, as was suggested could be an option. So I think we've got to look at the military and the way it manages its affairs. We need, obviously, individuals to be joining our military ranks in defense of the country, but it seems as though the standards that we're going to are far too low, and the military itself needs to do some evaluation of its practices.
Okay, thank you. We had Dr. Johnson, I know about your redirect, but I'm going to go to Dr. Abernathy to let her answer. How do you view the threat from white nationalism in the military? And what do you think needs to be done to combat it?
Well, gentlemen, I have to unequivocally condemn what I'm hearing here, that it's somehow okay to be a Nazi just because there are extremists on the left wing too. That's what I'm hearing. 43% of domestic terrorism is white supremacists, and they do it in the name of white supremacy. You cannot be a Nazi and be in our military. There was a war about this. We know which side we're on. Literally, the whole world was involved. You cannot be a Nazi and be in the military. You cannot swear to protect us against enemies, both foreign and domestic, when you yourself are a domestic enemy to everyone in the population that is not white. This is a problem, not just in that these people are fundamentally incompatible with being able to serve honorably and be able to fulfill their commitment to uphold the Constitution. But like you said, Ms. Purvis, we are training domestic terrorists on our own soil by allowing these people to be in the military and get trained, to learn how to use weapons, to learn how to be snipers and everything. This is a problem. How do I think we should deal with it? Well, first of all, we should not have any tolerance for white supremacists in the military. I don't think we should have any tolerance for white supremacists on the planet. But anytime you see an inkling of this, to me, that is an automatic dishonorable discharge. And of course, they have the right to due process, have the right to, clear their name, to make sure that they are not being unjustly accused. But this is such a threat to our national security and our values that we supposedly believe in, that we cannot have any tolerance for it. And we should not be degrading this whatsoever by suggesting, oh, there are other kinds of terrorists.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to Dr. Larry Johnson, because you've asked for a redirect.
Yes, thank you. I just want to make it very clear what I'm saying here. Let's put this in quotes. We're talking about white nationalists, or AKA anyone might be identified as a Nazi. This is not saying that every single white person is like this, okay? Because this is the accusation that is always hurled at a minority when they raise the issue of white nationalists, okay? So this is not accusing all white people of being bad people, okay? This is about, let's not have our military be a conduit through which these people who generally would be a threat to the entire republic. So I just wanted to make that very clear. This is not an attack, quote, on white people, it's white nationalists.
Understood. Bill, did we have enough room for that other extension on this question? It's unsure. No. Okay, so Joe, go ahead. This will be your last extension. 1 minute, I think. Oh, he's frozen. Joe, are you with us? Joe, are you here? Oh,
Joe,
it looks like Joe is frozen. Oh, okay. Did he read? He probably is trying to dial back in right now. I'll maybe give him a couple seconds. Otherwise, we'll have to move on for the sake of time. Oh, is he back with us yet? No. Okay. Okay. So the next question is going to deal with maternal mortality rates. In her book, Weathering the Extraordinary Stress of Ordinary Life in an Unjust Society, Dr. Arlene Geronimus points out that Black mothers in their mid to late 30s die at a rate 5 times higher than white mothers of a comparable age. Variation in quality of care, chronic conditions, for example, cardiac and coronary conditions, are the underlying conditions that affect Black women. Structural racism and implicit bias are identified as factors in the high rate of maternal mortality among Black women. Among 11 high-income countries, the U.S. has the highest maternal mortality rate and is the only one where maternal mortality is increasing. More than 80% of pregnancy-related deaths in the U.S. are preventable.
Okay, got it.
Recognizing urgent maternal warning signs, providing timely treatment, and delivering respectful, quality care can prevent many pregnancy-related deaths. And if you're curious, let me just tell you the other underlying causes of death, the leading causes of death. Mental health conditions were the leading underlying cause of death among Hispanic and non-Hispanic white persons, and hemorrhage was the leading underlying cause of death among non-Hispanic Asians. So I just wanted to give you a broader idea of some of the leading causes in each of the racial groups for maternal death. What would your administration do to stem the maternal mortality rates in this country for all women, and in particular for women of color as well, since they have a higher rate of maternal mortality death? And I'm going to start with Dr. Larry Johnson. What would you do about maternal mortality rates?
Well, I think one of the things we can do to help combat this situation is to expand the Affordable Care Act to universality. This is why I'm a very strong believer in universal health care as a human right. And so once we have that process taken care of, we can also target particular minority groups who have a disproportionate negative effect in our present medical system. So expanding the Affordable Care Act is one of the ways that we can directly target that problem.
Okay. Erskine Levi, what would your administration do to stem maternal mortality rates for women of color and for all women?
Yes, it could just be something as simple as what countries or even states have the lowest mortality rate, and what are they doing and using Dr. Johnson's Affordable Care Act and anybody else has to talk about it that we can get them in. Do that. So whatever's working, we need to take up that mantle and go with it. I don't see why that some races would have one thing over another, or a low thyroid over high thyroid, or whatever the reason is, when it's somebody's doing it right. Is it the doctor? Is it the state? Is it a country? Well, I think we should all adopt the procedures that those countries, states, or doctors are doing that are saving more lives, and do that. Simple as that.
Okay. Peter Sonsky, what would your administration do to stem maternal mortality rates for all women, and in particular for women of color who have higher maternal mortality rates?
Thank you. I think more standardized prenatal care, and we can do this. We can make this deliverable through Medicaid programs or other existing healthcare programs easily. I think also just allowing for a greater variety or greater options for mothers to elect during their prenatal care periods. Maternal care like accessibility to midwives and doulas and others that can be more readily available and more able to help discern problems before they become a larger issue, and just to look out for warning signs that might otherwise not be viewed. We've got lots of cultural problems to be sure, but I think that there are answers out there, and we can deliver them just by opening the door to more options for women, Black women, as well as other women in need during their prenatal periods.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, what would you do to stem maternal mortality rates among women of color and all women?
Well, Delman, and unfortunately, this is not an issue of a lack of health care for women of color. This is also not an issue of income, because my first thought was that, okay, the disparity in maternal mortality rates could be because there is a disparity when it comes to income. But when you control for that, even rich Black women die at a higher rate than the poorest white woman does. And the reason why is because we have a long established history of, like, J. Marion Sims, the father of gynecology, did his all of his experiments on enslaved women. 40% of medical students still believe the lie that Black skin is thicker than white skin. There was a study that was done where people could not recognize the facial cues of pain as easily in Black faces as they could with white faces. So I don't necessarily think that it's overt racism. It certainly is not an issue of access to care. You know, the Emergency Medical and Treatment Act, EMTALA, I can't remember what it was. You have to be delivered even if you don't have insurance. If you are in labor, you will have your baby delivered. If you're in an emergency, you can go to a hospital and have your child delivered. But when a Black woman goes and has her child delivered, she is much more likely to die than I am. And the reason why is we need educational programs. We need implicit bias tests to see where maybe you don't understand something. We need to correct all of the misinformation that's out there, that's even in medical textbooks still, about differences between Black and white people when it comes to pain. Like the idea that Black women feel pain less, but Black people feel pain less. There are a bunch of things we need to do, but it's not about access to care. It's about systemic racism.
Okay, thank you. Joe Schreiner, what would your administration do to stem the maternal mortality rates among women of color and all women?
Fine, yeah. And I want to preface this by saying, I noticed a couple of things in the chat. In no way am I justifying white nationalism whatsoever. But what I am saying is that right now in our divided, polarized society, there's a tremendous amount of subjectivity on both parts that put people in boxes as opposed to looking at individual cases. And we don't want to get caught up in this McCarthyism thing where we're just labeling everybody. So anyway, to go to this one, and it goes back to the same thing I've been talking about. In the inner city of Cleveland, there's a hospital up the street. And then about 4 miles, maybe 5 miles to the east is Cleveland Clinic. And a lot of the Black women that live in that particular area, and poor white women, go to the small hospital close to home there. And the quality of care isn't the best. There's overcrowding. There's all kinds of stuff that would lead to a higher mortality rate than if you had really good insurance and you could go to Cleveland Clinic and get the kind of attention that they provide there. That's just reality. And so our administration has come up with a whole regional healthcare plan to shift that around so that the ASP talks about human dignity and equality. And the healthcare plan I propose would bring that to America. It would provide a lot more individual attention for people. There would be community pharmacies where people could afford to go there. There would be things called Marillac clinics where there's volunteer doctors and volunteer nurses that are extremely good, that staff these places and provide a tremendous amount of help for people in those kind of situations. So until you really deal with poverty on a systemic level, this is going to continue to increase.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are, it looks like at our, is it the penultimate question? Let me make sure. Yes, this looks like our penultimate question. PFAS are man-made chemicals that have been used in industry and consumer products worldwide since the 1940s. They've been used to make nonstick cookware, water-repellent clothing, stain-resistant fabrics and carpets, some cosmetics, firefighting foam, products that resist grease, water, and oil. It is during the production and use of these PFAS, however, that these can migrate into the soil, water, and air. And most PFAS do not break down, so they remain in the environment. And according to the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, research involving humans suggests that high levels of certain PFAS may lead to increased cholesterol levels, decreased vaccine response in children, changes in liver enzymes, increased risk of high blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnant women, small decreases in infant birth weights, and increased risk of kidney or testicular cancer. On May 15th of this year, the Harvard School of Public Health released results of a study which found that people who live in communities with higher proportions of Black and Hispanic Latino residents are more likely to be exposed to harmful levels of PFAS in their water supplies than people living in other communities. Look, this is not a new phenomenon. Other cities with predominantly minority populations have been experiencing water quality problems for years. Flint, Michigan is still dealing with ramifications of the lead contamination of its water supply. Residents of Jackson, Mississippi have been periodically advised to boil their drinking water. The American Solidarity Party espouses subsidiarity. Simply put, the idea that social and political issues should be dealt with at the most immediate or local level. In the case of access to safe drinking water, what is the proper level of involvement for the federal government? And what would your administration do to ensure access to safe drinking water for all Americans, especially minorities and those experiencing poverty? Erskine Levi, we'll start with you. What would your administration do in this case? What is the proper level of involvement for the federal government, and what would you do to ensure access to safe drinking water?
Yes, a side note, that's something I never brought up because it was a small part of my life. I took a water treatment plant class at Citrus College a long time ago, just in case I wanted to take the state license and get into a water treatment operations. My mom retired from Metropolitan Water District, also taken that very same class years before me, and got a certification to work at a water treatment plant. I really don't know what is so hard to treat the water. What I do not understand is why so many chemicals have to be used. That never really got brought up in the class that I took. And for another side instance is when people are pulling head lettuce out of the ground, they have to do it in like suits, chemical suits. I guess it's that dangerous. And then they pick it and wash it off a little bit and sell it to us at the stores. And the lack of any kind of reading levels on the ingredients is if it's under 2%, they don't have to say what it is. I think it's a bunch of hogwash. They should say what it is. And maybe we got to need to go through at federal level and figure out ways to get rid of as many chemicals as we can. Along with that, something the federal government can do is to build desalination plants, because the states complain that they're really expensive. Okay, federal government builds it along the coast. I mean, not along the whole coast. You don't want to darken the whole coast, but, along the coast to bring in fresh drinking water, turn salt water into drinkable water, or at least potable water, or water they can use in the agriculture. And I think that would tend to break down a little bit of the water problems we have across the country. Get rid of the chemicals, desalination plants. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Peter Sonsky, what is the proper level of the federal and government regarding safe drinking water? And what would your administration do to ensure access to safe drinking water for all Americans?
Sure. Well, minimally, I think at a federal level, there is opportunity for FEMA's involvement, federal emergency management, to act to remedy situations when PFAS is detected, providing potable water and other service and assistance. We've got to obviously determine regulations, and whether those regulations are federal or state level for the management of water, public water systems. There shouldn't be any kind of problem at all in public drinking water made available to citizens. But I'm gonna offer a situation to you that is contrary to what you've described, because here in a suburban area that I live in, we've had a PFAS contamination due to fire foam. We have a fire company that's in a village, and there are many residences around it. There's a school, and there's been well contamination because there's no public water in this area. So we've had well contamination and the need to provide potable water for residents as well as the school to address the situation. So the state DEEP, Department of Environmental Protection, has come in and been able to help detect the problems, but they have done very little in the way of remediation assistance. And I think there's got to be situations like this where crises come up. We need to be able to have emergency funds set aside for remediation to make sure that people have access to that clean water and alternative remedies to get them water when wells are contaminated.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, what is the proper level of involvement for the federal government with regard to safe drinking water, and what would your administration do to ensure access to safe drinking water for all Americans?
Well, I think it's really important to note that it's not a threat whatsoever to subsidiarity to understand the basic truth that things like water and air do not necessarily respect the concept of state borders. This is you know what I'm saying, right? So if there's polluted water in one state, there's going to be polluted water in another state. And this pollution is not something that we can control at the state level. This is why we have an Environmental Protection Agency. This is why we have an EPA. And I was really pleased. It was actually in March, mid-March, that President Biden enacted a new rule with the EPA on PFAS specifically, and applies those standards globally to make sure that, because it's at the federal level, we know that there's not an issue of equity, that one state might be taking care of their drinking water better for their citizens than another state might be taking care of their drinking water. Because in your question, I was already thinking about, at the beginning of the question, I already thought about Flint. I already thought about some of those examples that you gave. These are perfect examples about how we cannot handle this at a lower level. And it's not just because pollution does not necessarily respect boundaries, it's because of ideas like common pool resources. When you have pollutants like farmers that are using certain things in their crops, certain fertilizers, for example, or pesticides, going down the Mississippi River, ending up in the Gulf of Mexico and building, these algae that choke out fish and other wildlife, important part of the ecosystem. We are all in this together. The federal government has to absolutely take the lead. And what is the proper role of the federal government? As much as it needs to be to keep Mother Earth going, to keep us all alive. So I don't think that this is a threat to subsidiarity at all. I think that this is a perfect example of why we have a federal government.
Thank you. Joe Schreiner, what is the proper level of involvement for the federal government? What would your administration do here to ensure access to safe drinking water?
Well, Jacqueline, like myself, probably Googled this and found out that the Biden-Harris administration has set something up in order to deal with it on some level, just like they have done with lead. They want to be lead-free by 2030. But here's the thing. We are so stuck on stupid in this country. It is beyond belief. And here's why. Okay, so the PFAS or whatever those things are, they're using biomedical material. The stuff that exploded in that train on East Palestine, they're using paints and solvents and cleaning material and that kind of thing. Jacqueline was talking about the herbicides and pesticides that go into the crops, and then not only get into the Gulf of Mexico, but get into our systems and create chemical cocktails that cause all kinds of cancer. Here's the stuck on stupid thing. We need to ban that stuff. Instead of controlling it and trying to do, we need to, when we figure out that something's carcinogenic, we need to ban that stuff. The EPA can do that, and an administration can push the EPA to ban that stuff. That's why we're so stuck on stupid. 1 in 3 people get cancer in a lifetime now in America. And that's just not happening out of the blue. We went to Oberlin College. There's a guy, David Orr, he's an author. He wrote a book called Earth in Balance. He said, Joe, those herbicides and pesticides, they not only kill the weeds and the bugs, they get into the plants. And what do? We ingest the plants. He said, those are creating huge chemical cocktails in our system. But we won't look at it. And the reason we won't look at it is because Monsanto has this big lobbying arm in DC, that some people refer to as Monsanto at this point. And so somebody needs to stand up to them, and to drive the EPA to start to do the right thing. That's the bottom line with this.
Thank you. Dr. Larry Johnson, what's the proper level of involvement for the federal government, and what would your administration do to ensure access to safe drinking water for all Americans?
Well, all I can say is ditto to Dr. Abernathy and ditto to Joe. I don't think I could say it any better than that. I totally agree with everything they said.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to be fair to Joe. You dropped off when you were trying to respond about the military. Did you have anything that you wanted to say?
No, I appreciate you doing that, Gloria, but I'd rather take my minute for the end. And in the beginning part, I just talked about my belief.
Okay. So this is a member submitted question. And you'll each be asked to address each part specifically. Early on, we asked how and if you would support the eventual nominee. And they want to see how your stance has evolved over the course of the primary. So the first question has to do with availability as a possible vice president. Just a simple yes or no. Will you be willing to serve as the vice president? And I'm just going to ask each person. So it's just a yes or no. Would you be willing to serve as the vice president? Peter Sonsky.
No.
Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy.
Leaning strongly toward no, but for very altruistic reasons.
Joe Schreiner, yes or no?
No.
Dr. Larry Johnson, yes or no? We can't hear you. We cannot hear you.
If they think it will help the party, yes.
Erskine Levi, yes or no? Would you be willing to serve as vice president?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Okay, next question, and this is the last question before your closing statements. If you are not the vice president, in what ways are you going to support the nominee between now and next November? Peter Sonsky. I'm saying Sonsky.
If I'm not the vice
president, in what ways are you going to support the nominee between now and next November?
I'm going to continue to support the party. I'm going to continue to act in my local capacity as an elected official, and perhaps seek even re-election, and promote the values of the party. If somebody asks my assistance, I'm glad to be of response, but I am not going to give direction. I'm going to let the individual who the party has selected run the campaign as they see fit. And I'm going to continue to serve as a proud member on a local level.
Okay. Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, if you're not the vice president, what ways are you going to support the nominee between now and next November?
Well, first and foremost, they have my vote. Absolutely. Secondly, they're going to be in my front, their name, last name, and whoever their running mate is going to be on the sign in my front yard. I'm going to be rocking their last name on the back of my minivan in a bumper sticker form. So obviously, I'm going to be voting for them, and I'm going to be promoting their candidacy far and wide as much as I can. I'm also going to donate to the effort, because filing fees for ballot access are expensive, and we do not yet have ballot access in certain areas. And a lot of it has to do, not necessarily with the laws of that area and the rules associated with signatures. A lot of it has to do with just money issues. Getting me on the ballot here in Texas when I was running for governor, that was $4,000. So I'm going to be donating as well, because I am so grateful for whoever ends up nominating, giving me the chance to do my civic duty without blood on my hands. That I want to make sure that people in other states have that same opportunity and privilege. So I'm going to be wholeheartedly and completely supporting whomever is nominated. The reason why I'm reticent, very strongly reticent about doing so as a VP, is just because I'm a little worried about the optics associated with being a pro-life party and all of the narrative about being pro-life, being anti-woman and anti-feminist and keeping women in their place and controlled by men. And since we're all newcomers, it doesn't necessarily make sense to have somebody that's clearly not outranked. I mean, I've got federal policy experience. I got international policy experience. I got a PhD in this, right? To have someone like me as VP, I think that unfortunately people might ask why. Why is she the VP when somebody else is oh, wait, is it because she's a woman? That's my concern. That's why I'm reticent to be vice president, a running mate, but I am absolutely supporting whoever is nominated fully, completely.
Okay. Thank you, Joe Schreiner. If you're not the vice president, in what ways are you going to support the nominee between now and next November?
Well, I'm going to preface this with past tense. For the last 2 months, I've run in 7 successive election cycles as an independent presidential candidate. And I have spent a tremendous amount of time on the streams trying to give advice from my experience to all of the candidates about what works, what doesn't work out there, how to generate press, how to do this, how to do that. And going forward, if I'm not the nominee, I have vowed that I would continue to help in a consulting way with whoever the candidate is. So, in all sincerity, I didn't know. And it's about the vice president thing. I just had a conversation with somebody in the party yesterday. I had no idea this was going to be a yes or no answer. I was waiting for the nomination to be over with and then make a decision about that. So this came as a little bit of a surprise to me. But again, my first response would be no to this. But as far as supporting the candidate, because I believe in the party very strongly, and I would, in all sincerity, continue to help. Even if I continue to run as an independent, I would help my competition. So for whatever that's worth, guys, and hopefully it's been appreciated what I've done so far as trying to give some advice, because the rest of the candidates really haven't been out there doing this. So that's where I'm at this point.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Larry Johnson, if you are not the vice president, in what ways are you going to support the nominee between now and next November?
Well, first of all, as Colorado State Chair, I'm going to be working very hard to make sure that our nominee is a success in Colorado. I mean, I will only be in this position until December, but I'll do everything I can as a state chair to help that nominee succeed in Colorado. One thing I really would like to see happen is that we have some kind of a really strong fundraising event in Colorado. I see Colorado as being one of the forerunner states for actually just kicking off ASP as being a successful national party. Colorado is one of those states where I think it could really happen. And so as a state chair, that's what I would do. I have other plans, but they're not ones that I want to announce publicly at this time.
Okay, thank you. Erskine Levi, if you are not the vice president, in what ways are you going to support the nominee between now and next November?
Well, I would like to ask to be part of their campaign team, whoever that may be. I'll be helping them out. I'll be a political advisor. I have some experience doing that. So I'd be on the campaign team if I can to help them. And of course, being in California, I would like to also, help make sure California goes by way of our ASP nominee. But as for all that, if I'm not either the presidential nominee or the vice presidential nominee, and I will be helping, I can also run for something. And the plan is I will run for Congress. And I'll try to be a congressional candidate while I'm helping out our nominee. If by chance that our nominee actually wins the presidency, then I'm going to apply to have be on the Secretary of State, Chief of Staff, maybe the head of this NSA, DOJ, DOD, or DHS, and a whole bunch of other acronyms that I could be helpful with. And also with that, I'm going to try to build our political body up from the bottom. I want to really jump into getting a county level ASP as well as districts within a county level ASP set up so we can start from the ground up, all with the ASP banner. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you. Now, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their closing statements. And we'll start with Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy.
Well, thank you all so much once again for being here. It's always great to have a chance to talk about the issues that affect all of us. I've become a little bit of a cliche when I say that what unites us is stronger than what divides us. And I was very concerned about how this campaign has focused on issues that don't necessarily matter in the long run, because they only matter if we are able to get ballot access and we're able to actually win the White House. And so I hate to see that these are fostering division among us. And that's so unnecessary, because I'd like to think that, like I've said before, that at the end of the day, no matter whom is chosen, we're all going to get behind that person. What's incredibly disheartening was that I just heard that, Mr. Schreiner is going to be running for another party, and Mr. Swansky is, not going to be serving to promote the candidate that's actually chosen. And that's bothersome. I'm so pleased to see that Dr. Johnson is still going to be helping out in Colorado, and Captain Levi is still going to be helping out and running for something else. That's great. But it's disturbing if we have a competition where people are in it to achieve some sort of recognition, some sort of level, and not in it for the party. Because if it's about supporting the party, then you support our candidate. That's what you do to support the party. And you run for office as a member of this party, not as a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. And I appreciate that Captain Levi is willing to run under our banner, but Mr. Sonsky, I don't think that you did. They believe you ran as a Republican, and Mr. Schreiner, you're going to run as an independent. We really need to rethink what our priorities are here. Either we're in this for the party and party growth and unity, or we're in it for ourselves. When you're casting your vote, please think very, very closely about what values you want to support and who you want to choose, if that person is in it for the party or in it for themselves.
Okay, thank you. Joe Schreiner, you have 2 minutes to make your closing statement.
You know what? I wanted the extra 1 minute on this, Bill. Okay. I have one more, I believe. Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
now the gloves are going to come off reciprocally. Numbers. 250,000. That's how many miles I've traveled through the country doing research for my position papers. The amount of miles my opponents combined have traveled for their position paper research, if they even have a position paper on their sites, sans the ASB basic platform, 0 miles. 0. You've just experienced a small amount of that traveling tonight. And it is that research that lends credibility and makes those ASP platform points come to life. 60,000. That's approximately the number of homes and cars ASP information entered in just the last week through mainstream newspaper and radio interviews that I generated. Plus, I put a letter to the editor about the ASP in the newspaper with 70,000 circulation. My opponents combined during that time, 0 letters to the editor and 0 media interviews. Not to mention my campaign has been in some 1,500 mainstream newspapers, radio, and TV spots over the years. Brian Carroll recently said, with the party structure in place, what the ASP needs more than anything else at this time is media exposure. Now, 12. just a little aside, the other candidates go out during the primary season and campaign. Nikki Haley's out there, Asa Hutchinson's out there, Donald Trump's out there. Everybody else has sat on this stream doing stuff. 12, the amount of street corner, community breakfast, farmers market, restaurants I have stumped in passing out ASP literature throughout Northwestern Ohio. My opponents combined with any of the outward stumping or the general public, 0 venues. And I could go on. Point being, To get back to psychology, you key ASP influencers have become buddies with some of my opponents while you've been building the party internally. That's understandable. I've been out building the campaign. The synergy between the party and the campaign would be dynamite. You guys need to start to look at this more objectively than from a subjective friendship. They like me more on these Facebook pages. It's not the best for the party, since Jacqueline, you're so concerned about the party.
Okay, next, Dr. Larry Johnson, you have 2 minutes to make your closing statement.
First of all, I want to congratulate everybody for going through this entire process and putting yourself forward to provide the party with a vision for the general election. I think that's very important for expanding the party, and we need that leadership. I think it should be me, obviously. I believe that my vision is the superior vision of the new America, War Powers Amendment, neutrality, the Gateway Act, Shaley, Gun Violence Prevention Act, and so forth. But I just want to congratulate everybody. And, you know, I've given extensive thought to what the vision of America should be. And I sit second place to no person on that topic. Thank you, and God bless all.
Thank you. Erskine Levi, you have 2 minutes to make your closing statement.
Yes, I just want to say that I would like your nomination to be the president of the ASP, well, not of the ASP, but President of the United States, but under the ASP banner. I want to reiterate things that I've reiterated in past debates. I have experience in elected office. I was a part of the 48th Assembly District Republican Central Committee back when I was Republican, before I switched over to ASP. After I switched over to ASP, I was a delegate for the ASP, and I believe the year 2020 or 2021, I've applied to be a delegate again this year. I have experience in the military. Rose from private to captain. They call that Maverick in the U.S. Army. And I worked with generals. I worked at the Army and division levels of the military during combat planning and phase operations of combat. I know what they think like. I know what they do. I went through the regular education system, officer candidate school, to get that. I am a former police officer, so I know about the executive branch, at least at the lower level, which being the President of the United States would be the executive branch at the most highest level to enforce the laws of our country and enforce our U.S. Constitution. And I just also want to add that I am a married man to my wife, Heather, for over 40 years. And I have 2 sons, Matthew and Joseph, 33 and 29. So yes, I'm a family guy, pro-traditional family, pro-life all the way from conception until natural death. And I do not believe in the death penalty. As a former cop, it's hard to say, but it's not a deterrent. It's not doing anything to deter the country. I think I have what it takes to run the country very well. And again, I do not want this to be a popularity contest. Who can best among us 5 actually run the country? That's what you need to look at. Thank you very much, and God bless.
Thank you. And finally, Peter Sonsky, you have 2 minutes to make your closing statement.
Thank you very much. I talked in my opening remarks about civility and how proud I was to be affiliated with the American Solidarity Party because of the civility that it stands for. And I'm going to try to model that civility in my closing remarks. I've heard some comments about media coverage or media attention, and it occurs to me the last 2 days we've seen 2 candidates enter the presidential race, Tim Scott and today Ron DeSantis, and they entered it to much hype, much media coverage. And, that response, that public interest should really come as no surprise, because the duopoly, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, dominates politics, and without a lot of effort. And its candidates get the attention. The American Solidarity Party doesn't enjoy that same popularity, at least not yet. What the ASP does enjoy are values and a platform that are cohesive, that have a long tradition rooted in Catholic social teaching. The ASP, it puts people first. It puts people above power. It puts people above the interests of wealthy donors. And it puts people above the interests of personal gain that so many candidates have. The American Solidarity Party may not be well known, but it has the right message. It has a message to inspire voters who are disenfranchised and who are looking for a new direction in their government. So I would appeal to the members, you now have the opportunity to determine who is going to carry that message, who will represent those values, who's going to be a clear and reasoned voice in the frenzy that's to come. The odds of winning in this party are long, but the odds of the party winning new members and new respect are strong with the right candidate. I ask please for your vote and your confidence. Thank you.
Well, that wraps our panel for tonight, our discussion. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for participating and for allowing me to be your moderator for tonight's final, I guess you want to call it a debate, or final discussion of very important issues that matter to American voters. I'm going to turn it over now to Jeffrey Combs, who I believe is going to close out the evening with some directions as well.
Thank you very much, Gloria. We thank you for joining us for tonight's debate and for following along through the previous months of our primary season. Ballots to select the delegates for our national convention and for the presidential primary will be emailed to voting members shortly. We know that OPA vote emails are going to spam at a higher rate than how we would like. So please make sure that you check your spam, junk mail, promotions, or other folders for your ballot. If you do not have your ballot by the morning, please contact, actually I should hit the right here, yes, contact admin at American Solidarity #party.org. Don't forget that we will be able to see this and all the previous debates and interviews on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@AM Solidarity, or you could search for American Solidarity Party 2023 Presidential Primary on your favorite podcast site, or at podcast.solidarity-party.org. And these links will be found in the description of the video below. We thank you for your time, and God bless you.